The lawyer's office was suffocatingly warm, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. The air was thick with the kind of strained silence that precedes a verdict. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat my sister, Chloe, flanked by her smarmy husband, Greg. She was dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, a performance of grief that was as impeccable as her tailored black dress. On my side, there was just me. The family lawyer, a man named Mr. Abernathy who had replaced our longtime counsel last year, cleared his throat and peered at us over his half-moon glasses. He held up a small remote control. "Your parents, Richard and Eleanor, wish to address you both directly one last time," he said, his tone oozing a practiced solemnity. He pressed a button, and a large television screen on the wall flickered to life. My parents appeared, seated on a gaudy gold sofa in their living room. They looked tanned, healthy, and utterly self-satisfied. My father spoke first. "Chloe, my darling," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You have always been our pride and joy. Your business acumen, your social grace, you understood our world. To you, we leave the bulk of our liquid estate. $10 million. Use it well. We know you will." Chloe let out a theatrical sob, clutching Greg's hand. My mother then turned her gaze to the camera, and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Alex," she said, and the name sounded like a mild disappointment on her lips. "You are different. You never quite grasped the importance of ambition, of building a legacy. Your pursuits, while time-consuming, have not been what we would call productive. We have always believed in the value of earning one's own way." My father nodded in agreement. "So, to you, we leave a challenge, a gift of motivation. We want you to go earn your own. Your mother's first edition book collection is yours, of course. But the rest is up to you." He smiled, a final, dismissive beam of paternal condescension. The screen went black. The silence that followed was broken by Chloe's sniffle. Mr. Abernathy slid a document across the table to her. "This is the wire transfer authorization. The funds will be in your account within 24 hours. To me, he slid a small, plain manila envelope. Inside was a list of books. I looked from the document that represented $10 million to my list of dusty classics. I felt the lawyer's pity, my brother-in-law's smug contempt, and my sister's triumphant relief. But the emotion that settled inside me wasn't anger or hurt. It was a cold, quiet click, like a locked tumbler falling into place. My name is Alex Sterling, 42 years old, and my parents were right. My pursuits were time-consuming. For the last 20 years, while my sister was getting her MBA and marrying well, my unproductive pursuit was managing the sprawling, chaotic, and terrifyingly insecure digital and financial empire my parents had cobbled together. I was their unpaid, unacknowledged, and utterly essential systems administrator, cybersecurity expert, and forensic accountant. They saw a son who played on the computer. They had no concept of the digital fortress I had built and maintained around their reckless financial lives. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly even. I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket. "Enjoy the books, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "I know how much you enjoy your hobbies." I walked out of that office, past the pitying looks of the secretaries, and into the bright, indifferent sunshine. I didn't go to a bar. I didn't call a friend to vent. I drove home to my modest suburban house, a house I had bought with my own money from freelance security consulting, a job my parents referred to as tinkering. I went into my study, a room filled not with inherited antiques, but with servers, monitors, and networking hardware. This was my world. And in my world, every system has a log. Every transaction leaves a trace. And a will, especially a will this lopsided and cruel, is not just a document. It is the final output of a flawed and failing system. And I am an expert in analyzing system failures. I opened a new encrypted container on my primary server. I labeled it Project Legacy. My parents had told me to go earn my own. They had no idea that for years I had already been earning it, cataloging it, and securing it. They thought they had cut me out. They had just given me my final project. I let a full day pass before I began. Patience is a critical tool in any analysis. I knew that upon the will's execution, a series of automated financial processes would be triggered, and I wanted to observe that initial data cascade in its entirety. I spent the time meticulously packing my mother's books, which had been delivered to my house that afternoon. They were beautiful, rare editions of Austen and the Brontes. It was the one piece of our family history that felt clean, untainted by the desperate social climbing and financial shell games that had defined my parents' lives. As I ran my hands over the worn leather bindings, memories surfaced. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome. I was 25, just starting my freelance business. I had discovered that my father's email had been compromised in a major data breach. I tried to explain the concept of password hygiene to him. Dad, you can't use the dog's name for everything. You're exposed. He had waved a dismissive hand. Alex, please. That's what you're for. Just handle it. He didn't see it as a vulnerability I was helping him patch. He saw it as a task I was created to perform. I wasn't his son. I was his IT support. That dynamic never changed. For 2 decades, I was the silent ghost in their machine. I managed their half-dozen cloud storage accounts, each with a different, ridiculously insecure password. I cleaned viruses from their laptops after they clicked on ludicrous phishing emails. I set up the encrypted wallets for my father's ill-advised forays into cryptocurrency, ventures he bragged about at the club but couldn't explain to his own broker. He called them digital vaults. He had no idea that the recovery keys, the only things that gave the coins any value, were stored not in a vault, but in a triple encrypted file on my server because he'd lost the physical device they were on within a week. They lived in a state of willful ignorance, protected by a son they believed was wasting his life. This was the foundation of my investigation. They didn't know what they had, where it was, or how it was secured. Only I did. So when they drafted a will stating their estate was worth approximately $12 million, 10 for Chloe, $1 million for the art, and some change, I knew that number was at best a fantasy. My first step was to access the hidden inventory I had built for my own sanity years ago. It was a private, encrypted database where I tracked all of their known digital and physical assets, cross-referenced with their financial accounts. It was the only complete map of their chaotic world. I logged in and began a system-wide audit, comparing my inventory with the summary provided in the will. The first glaring discrepancy, as I suspected, was the art. The will listed the sterling art collection with an appraised value of $1 million. This was absurd. I knew for a fact that my father's prize Monet alone had been appraised at over $3 million just 2 years ago. The entire collection was worth closer to $6 million. So where was the other $5 million? I accessed the secure server where I stored all the high-resolution digital scans and provenance documents for their collection, a project I'd undertaken after my father almost sold a valuable painting to a fraudster for a fraction of its worth. I pulled up the file on the Monet, a landscape title Matin sur la Seine. I compared my 8K resolution scan with a photo of the painting hanging in their living room, taken by Chloe and posted on social media just a month ago. I zoomed in. The brushstrokes in Chloe's photo were flat, lifeless. The signature was subtly, but undeniably, wrong. It was a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. A cold dread, mingled with a strange sense of vindication, began to settle in. My parents weren't just bad at managing their money. They were criminals. I started checking the other major pieces. A small Degas sculpture, a Cassatt portrait. I used digital comparison software, analyzing light and shadow, texture, and composition against my authenticated scans. All of them. All the most valuable pieces have been replaced by high-quality fakes. The $1 million collection listed in the will was probably accurate, because it was a collection of well-executed copies. This wasn't just about disinheriting me. This was a massive, complex fraud. They had disposed of the real art, but where did it go? And where did the money go? My mind raced through the possibilities. An insurance scam? Selling them on the black market to cover debts? Hiding assets? I needed more information. I needed to see the full, unredacted estate inventory, the formal appraisals, and the insurance riders. Things a disinherited son with a list of books would never be allowed to see. It was time to call on my ally. Evelyn Reed was a junior partner at the old family law firm before my parents switched to the suspiciously slick Mr. Abernathy. Evelyn was sharp, tech-savvy, and had always been quietly appalled by my parents' recklessness. We had worked together once when she needed me to recover a deleted file for a case, and we'd bonded over our shared, quiet professionalism. She had left the old firm to start her own practice, specializing in estate litigation. She was the perfect choice. I picked up a burner phone and sent her an encrypted message. Evelyn, it's Alex Sterling. I need to retain your services. I have a problem with my parents' estate. It involves forgeries, a fraudulent will, and about $5 million in missing art. Are you interested? Her reply came back in under a minute. I'm interested. My office. Tomorrow at 9. Bring everything you have. Evelyn's office was the antithesis of Mr. Abernathy's. It was a modern, minimalist space in a new downtown building, with clean lines and lots of natural light. It smelled of coffee and quiet competence. Evelyn herself was sharp and direct, dressed in a simple, dark pantsuit. There was no pretense about her. She gestured for me to sit and slid a tablet across the table. Standard retainer agreement. Everything we discuss is covered by attorney-client privilege. Now, tell me what you found. For the next hour, I laid it all out. I didn't just tell her. I showed her. I connected my encrypted laptop to her conference room monitor and walked her through the evidence. The comparison photos of the real paintings versus the forgeries. The provenance documents from my private server. The official appraisal documents I had archived 2 years prior, valuing the collection at $6 million, starkly contrasted with the $1 million figure in the will summary. I explained my unique position as the family's unofficial digital custodian, the sole holder of the keys to the kingdom. Evelyn listened intently, her expression unreadable. She swiped through the images, zoomed in on the signatures, and read the appraisal documents, her mind processing everything. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen for a long moment. "This is meticulous, Alex," she said, her voice betraying a hint of awe. "You've built a stronger case in 48 hours than most legal teams could build in a year." "It's what I do," I said. "I find anomalies in systems. This is just a bigger, messier system than I'm used to." "Okay," she said, shifting into professional mode. "Here's our situation. As the recipient of a specific bequest, the books, you have legal standing to question the administration of the estate. But to get what we need, we have to move carefully. A direct accusation will just put them on the defensive. We need to frame this as a procedural inquiry." She began to sketch out a plan on a whiteboard. "First, we formally request the complete, unredacted estate inventory and a copy of the appraisal used for the will. We'll say it's for your personal records as a named beneficiary. Abernathy will have to comply. Second, we file a motion for a temporary hold on the distribution of non-liquid assets, specifically the art collection, pending a new, independent appraisal. We'll cite the discrepancy between past appraisals and the current one as our justification." "He'll fight it," I said. "Chloe will fight it. She won't want the delay. Let them fight," Evelyn said with a thin smile. "The more they fight a simple request for a new appraisal, the more suspicious they look. A judge will grant it. It's standard procedure. While that's happening, you need to keep digging." "What am I looking for?" I asked. "You're looking for the why," she explained. "People don't replace $6 million worth of art with fakes for no reason. This isn't just greed, it's desperation. Were they being blackmailed? Did they have massive hidden debts? Was this a pre-bankruptcy scam to hide assets? Follow the money. Where did the real art go, and what came back in its place?" Her words focused my next steps. I had been concentrating on the assets, on what was missing. I needed to concentrate on the liabilities, on what might be hidden. My parents' financial life was a tangled web of credit cards, personal loans, and lines of credit. I had managed their online payment portals, but they often made deals in person with paperwork I never saw. However, I knew they had a primary bank, the one where my father's business account were held. And I knew my father, being both lazy and paranoid, had insisted I set up a system for him to view his account statements remotely from his yacht. It involved a secure VPN connection that I configured. And that VPN, I knew, had a master access key that was stored in my password vault. It was designed for me to perform maintenance, but it would give me read-only access to the transaction histories of all his linked accounts. It felt like a line I had never crossed before, moving from managing their systems to actively investigating their private finances. But they had declared war at that reading. My hesitation was a luxury I could no longer afford. That night, I initiated the connection. I felt a pang of something, guilt perhaps, as the familiar banking portal loaded on my screen. I navigated to the archived documents section, looking for loan agreements or large transfers in the months leading up to their deaths. I found it almost immediately. It wasn't a bank loan. It was a wire transfer confirmation for $10 million. An incoming transfer. The sender was an entity I'd never heard of, Argent Sovereign Holdings. The date was 6 months ago, exactly 1 week after they sold the real art collection through a private, offshore auction house, a transaction I could now see in their brokerage account history. They hadn't just sold the art for $5 or $6 million. They had somehow leveraged it, along with other assets, to secure a $10 million loan. The $10 million they had just willed to Chloe. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a simple case of hiding assets. This was something far more complex and far more dangerous. Argent Sovereign Holdings. The name sounded powerful and vaguely threatening. I started a new line of inquiry, my fingers flying across the keyboard. A few searches later, I found what it was. Argent Sovereign wasn't a bank or a traditional lender. It was a private credit firm, a polite term for one of the most ruthless, hard-money lenders in the world. They provided massive, short-term, high-interest loans to desperate people, secured by hard assets. Their collection methods were notoriously aggressive and legally airtight. This $10 million wasn't a gift to Chloe. It was a poison pill. The pieces began to lock into place with the chilling precision of a well-crafted trap. My parents, facing a financial reality they couldn't accept, had orchestrated a final, desperate gambit. They had quietly sold off their most valuable, authenticated art through a discreet channel. Then, using their remaining assets, and, most likely, their name and reputation, they had secured a massive $10 million loan from Argent Sovereign, a lender of last resort. And that money, the entire loan amount, was what they had bequeathed to Chloe. A normal bank loan would appear as a liability on the estate's balance sheet. The estate would be responsible for paying it back. But this wasn't a normal loan. I dug into the documentation I could access through the bank portal and found the preliminary loan agreement. It was structured in a way I had never seen before, a viciously clever piece of legal engineering. The loan was tied not to my parents personally, but to a newly created trust. And the sole beneficiary and future trustee of that trust, upon their death, was designated as Chloe. The loan's primary collateral was listed as the sterling art collection, which they had already secretly sold. The secondary collateral was everything else: the house, the stocks, and most terrifyingly, a personal guarantee from the trustee. The will was the mechanism to activate the trap. By accepting the $10 million, Chloe was also implicitly accepting her role as the new trustee of the fund that held the debt. She wasn't inheriting money. She was inheriting a $10 million liability from a predatory lender, secured by assets that were either fake or overleveraged. The due date for the first balloon payment, a staggering $2 million in interest alone, was in less than 90 days. A flashback hit me. Dinner at the country club about a year ago. My father was holding court, boasting about a brilliant new financial instrument he was using. "It's about leverage, Alex," he'd said, fixing me with a condescending stare. "Something you wouldn't understand. It's for people who make things happen, not for people who sit behind a screen." Chloe had chimed in, "Daddy's a genius. He's always 10 steps ahead." I realized now he wasn't talking about an investment. He was talking about this loan, this trap. He saw it as a brilliant move, a way to extract one last burst of cash to fund their lavish lifestyle for their final year, while passing the consequences onto the child he thought was savvy enough to handle it. He had always praised Chloe's ambition, her killer instinct. Perhaps, in his own twisted way, he saw this as his final lesson to her. a true test of her business acumen. Or maybe he just didn't care, as long as the problem became someone else's. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just disinherited me. They had potentially bankrupted my sister, the very daughter they claimed to adore. They had handed her a check for $10 million, knowing it was attached to a ticking bomb. And they had left me with a box of books, effectively shielding me from the entire blast radius. Their final act of dismissal was, ironically, an act of salvation. I spent the rest of the night compiling my findings into a coherent report for Evelyn. I mapped out the flow of money, from the art sale to the loan from Argent Sovereign into the trust, and then, via the will, to Chloe. I highlighted the key clauses in the loan agreement, the personal guarantee she would unknowingly be activating. I also did a deep dive on Argent Sovereign holdings. The stories I found in financial forums and legal news archives were chilling. They were known as the Undertakers. They specialized in asset seizure, moving with surgical speed and overwhelming legal force. They didn't negotiate. They collected. The next morning, I was at Evelyn's office when she arrived. I handed her a secure USB drive. "I think I found the why," I said. "And it's worse than we thought." We sat in her conference room as she reviewed the new information. Her face, usually a mask of professional calm, grew visibly paler as she grasped the sheer malice of the scheme. She read the terms of the Argent Sovereign loan, her eyes widening slightly. "My God," she whispered, "this is a debt instrument disguised as a bequest. It's designed to transfer liability. If she accepts that wire transfer, she's on the hook. Personally, they could go after her house, her husband's assets, everything." "The wire transfer was initiated the day of the will reading," I said. "Abernathy said the funds would be in her account within 24 hours. That means the money is already in her possession. She's already accepted it." Evelyn stood up and began to pace the room. "Abernathy, he has to be involved. No competent, ethical lawyer would draft a will like this without understanding the implications of the attached trust. He's not just the family lawyer. He's the architect of the trap." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Our original plan to contest the appraisal is too slow," she said, her mind racing. "The clock is ticking on that loan. We can't let this play out. We have to defuse the bomb. Now." She stopped pacing and looked at me. "Your sister needs to be informed. She has to understand immediately that the $10 million in her bank account is the most expensive thing she will ever own. She needs to reject the inheritance. She needs to formally disclaim the bequest and her role as trustee." "She'll never believe me," I said. "She'll think it's a trick, some pathetic attempt by me to claw back some of the money." "She won't believe you," Evelyn agreed. "Which is why you're not going to be the one to tell her. I am. We're going to call a meeting. You, me, your sister, her husband, and Mr. Abernathy. We will present them with the facts, and we will give them a choice. Cooperate in unwinding this fraudulent conveyance, or face the consequences of it, both from Argent Sovereign and from the district attorney." The plan was aggressive, confrontational. It wasn't my usual style, but Evelyn was right. My methodical, quiet investigation was complete. It was time for a calculated, overwhelming display of force. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for confrontation had arrived. Evelyn's legal assistant sent out the meeting request. It was formal, cold, and non-negotiable. An urgent meeting to discuss serious, undisclosed liabilities pertaining to the estate of Richard and Eleanor Sterling. The recipients were Chloe, Greg, and Mr. Abernathy. The location was a neutral one, a conference room at a high-end downtown hotel booked by Evelyn's firm. We wanted to strip them of the home field advantage of their own offices. The replies were almost immediate. Abernathy's was defensive, questioning the necessity of such a meeting. Greg's was arrogant, stating that Chloe's schedule was very full, but she could perhaps spare 30 minutes. Evelyn replied to both with a single sentence: "Attendance is not optional." We gave them 2 days to prepare. It was a strategic choice. We wanted them to have time to talk to each other, to build up their defensive narratives, to walk into that room brimming with misplaced confidence. I spent those 2 days refining my presentation. This wouldn't be a deep dive for a fellow professional like Evelyn. This was for an audience of one, Chloe. It had to be simple, visual, and brutal. I distilled my 100-page forensic report into a 20-slide presentation. I used large fonts, simple charts, and stark, red highlights on the key phrases in the loan documents. I wanted there to be no ambiguity, no room for misunderstanding. The presentation was a narrative of her own financial destruction. The morning of the meeting, I put on the same suit I had worn to the will reading. It felt like a costume for a different character now. Then I was the dismissed son. Today, I was the analyst delivering a fatal diagnosis. Evelyn and I met in the hotel conference room an hour early. We set up the projector and arranged our files on the table. We sat on one side, leaving 3 chairs on the other. It felt less like a meeting and more like an intervention. "Ready?" she asked me. "I am," I said. My pulse was steady. This wasn't about emotion. It was about presenting a data set and observing the results. Chloe, Greg, and Abernathy arrived together, a united front of smugness. Chloe swept into the room, not even making eye contact with me. Greg gave me a nod, so curt it was an insult. Abernathy arranged his leather briefcase on the table with an air of profound importance. "Evelyn, Alex," Abernathy began, taking charge. "I must protest this highly irregular meeting. My client has been through a great deal, and this kind of ambush is entirely unprofessional." "What's this about, Alex?" Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you're here to contest the will, you can save your breath. Our parents were very clear about their wishes." "I'm not here to contest the will, Chloe," I said calmly. "I'm here to save you from it. Please sit down." Evelyn gestured to the chairs. "As we stated, we have uncovered significant undisclosed liabilities tied to the estate. We believe you have all been deliberately misled, and you are now in a position of extreme financial and legal peril. This presentation will explain why." I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the screen. It was a simple picture of the $10 million wire transfer confirmation. "Chloe, this money is now in your account," I began. "You believe it is an inheritance. It is not. It is a loan, and you are the sole guarantor." I moved to the next slide, which showed the corporate logo for Argent Sovereign Holdings. The money came from this entity. They're not a bank. They are a predatory lender, and the loan comes due in 84 days. Abernathy paled visibly. He knew the name. That was the first crack in his composure. "This is absurd," Greg blustered. "Chloe's inheritance is from her parents' estate." "No," Evelyn cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "The money came from a trust, established by your parents 6 months ago. The will was merely the trigger that made Chloe the trustee and the recipient of the funds. By accepting the funds, she accepted the terms of the trust and the debt attached to it." I clicked through the next few slides, showing the loan agreement, the trust documents, and the personal guarantee clause, with Chloe's name clearly typed in as the responsible party. I had highlighted the terrifying phrases: unlimited personal liability, immediate asset seizure upon default, waiver of legal defense. Chloe's face remained a mask of defiance, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. Greg was starting to look nervous, his smugness evaporating. "This is just paper," Chloe said, her voice wavering slightly. "It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I said. I moved to a slide titled The Collateral. It had 2 pictures. On the left was a photo of the art collection hanging in my parents' home, the forgeries. On the right was a list of every other major asset in the estate: the house, the stock portfolio. The primary collateral for this $10 million loan was the real art collection, which your parents sold before they took out the loan. That is bank fraud. The secondary collateral is every other asset they owned. And because their assets do not cover the full value of the loan plus interest, the lender will come after the personal assets of the guarantor. "That's you, Chloe." Greg stood up. "This is ridiculous. We have lawyers. We'll fight this." "Fight what?" Evelyn asked, her tone icy. "The contract is legally binding." "And who will you sue? Your deceased parents for fraudulent inducement? The executor of the will for gross negligence." She leveled her gaze at Abernathy, who now looked physically ill. Or will you try to countersue one of the most litigious and aggressive private credit firms in the world? Their legal team will bury you. The final slide was a simple balance sheet. On one side, assets, $10 million. On the other side, liabilities, 12,000,000, loan principal plus interest. The bottom line weighs in huge, red letters. Net position, minus 12,000,000, loan principal plus interest. The bottom line was in huge, red letters. Net position, dash 12,000,000, loan principal plus interest. The bottom line weighs in huge, red letters. Net position, minus 2 million. This is the inheritance your parents left you, Chloe, I said quietly. It's not a gift. It's a $2 million hole, and it will only get deeper. They have chained a millstone around your neck. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. The truth, in all its brutal, mathematical simplicity, was laid bare before her. The victorious daughter, the savvy businesswoman, had been played for a fool by the two people she admired most. The carefully constructed facade of her life was beginning to fracture right before my eyes. The first sound to break the crushing silence was a choked, incredulous laugh from Chloe. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "No," she said, shaking her head, a wild look in her eyes. "No, you did this. This is your trick." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're a hacker. You faked all of this. You were always jealous, always hiding in your dark little room with your computers, and now you've cooked up this fantasy to steal my inheritance." Greg, seeing her panic, tried to rally. "She's right. This is character assassination. Slander. Mr. Abernathy, we're leaving." "I would advise against that," Evelyn said, her voice stopping them in their tracks. She placed a single, bound document on the table. It was my full forensic report. Everything Alex has presented is a brief summary of this report. It contains over 100 pages of verifiable evidence. Bank records, server logs, corporate filings, sworn expert opinions on the forgeries. It is a complete and factual account of a multi-layered fraud. "And Mr. Abernathy," she said, turning her attention to the lawyer, who was sweating profusely, "you should know that as the executor who certified this will, knowing the existence of the trust and its toxic nature, you are professionally liable for gross negligence and are potentially a party to the conspiracy to commit fraud. If this matter becomes public, your career will be over." Abernathy sank back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The fight was gone from him. He knew he was trapped. Chloe looked from Abernathy's terrified face to my calm expression. The foundation of her reality was crumbling. The people she trusted, her parents, her lawyer, were either deceivers or fools. The brother she had dismissed was the only person in the room who held the truth. "Why?" she whispered, the question directed at the empty space her parents once occupied. "Why would they do this to me?" "Because they were broke," I answered, my voice devoid of malice. It was a simple statement of fact. They were living on borrowed time and borrowed money. This was their last move. They kicked the can down the road, and you're the one who has to pay the toll. The business-savvy heiress persona shattered completely, revealing the terrified, favored child underneath. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice small, a plea directed not to her husband or her lawyer, but to me. Greg looked stunned by this shift in power. He had no answers. He was just a passenger on a luxury liner that was now sinking. "There is a way out," Evelyn said, stepping in to take control. "But it requires your immediate and complete cooperation. First, you will formally disclaim the bequest. You will sign a legally binding document rejecting the $10 million and your position as trustee. This will sever your connection to the debt. But the money is already in my account," Chloe cried. "We will work with the bank to have it returned to the trust, citing fraudulent inducement. It will be messy, but it's possible," Evelyn explained. "Second, Mr. Abernathy will immediately resign as executor of the estate, and we will petition the court to have me appointed as the new, independent administrator. His cooperation in this will be noted when we consider our next steps regarding his license. Abernathy nodded numbly, eager to take any lifeline offered. Third, Evelyn continued, as the new administrator, I will inform Argent Sovereign Holdings that the designated trustee has disclaimed her role, that the loan was obtained under fraudulent pretenses using non-existent collateral, and that the estate is insolvent. We will enter into negotiations, or, more likely, bankruptcy proceedings. It will be a legal firestorm, but the fire will be contained within the estate. It will not touch your personal assets. Greg finally spoke up, a glimmer of his old self-interest returning. So, Chloe gets nothing? Chloe gets to keep her house, her savings, and her future, I said. She gets to avoid being sued into oblivion by a firm that would strip her of everything she owns. Compared to the alternative, nothing is a pretty good deal. The choice was laid bare, a fantasy of wealth versus the brutal reality of ruin. For a long moment, Chloe was silent, the tears subsiding as the cold, hard logic of her situation sank in. She looked at her husband, who offered no support. She looked at her lawyer, who offered no defense. Then she looked at me. The person she had mocked and belittled her entire life was the one offering her an escape. Okay, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Okay, I'll do it. Evelyn slid the prepared documents across the table. A disclaimer of inheritance. A resignation letter for Abernathy. Chloe picked up the pen, her hand shaking so badly she could barely sign her name. She, who had been handed $10 million just days before, was now signing it all away to save herself. As she signed, I felt no triumph, no schadenfreude. I just felt a profound sense of melancholy. This was the true legacy of our parents, a shattered daughter, a disgraced lawyer, and a financial disaster born of ego and deceit. The great Sterling family name had amounted to nothing more than a well-executed con game. The meeting ended. Chloe and Greg left without another word, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Abernathy scurried out, a broken man. Evelyn and I were left alone in the conference room. She began packing the documents into her briefcase. You were right, Alex, she said. Your parents saved you. Their dismissal of you was the greatest gift they could have possibly given. I nodded, looking at the screen, which still showed the final balance sheet of Chloe's inheritance. A negative $2 million future that she had narrowly escaped. My inheritance, a box of books, and a clear conscience, had never looked so valuable. The bomb was defused. The fallout, however, was just beginning. The aftermath was a controlled demolition. With Evelyn appointed as the new administrator, we moved swiftly. Chloe's disclaimer of the inheritance was filed, and after a tense negotiation with the bank, the $10 million wire was reversed, sent back to the now-orphaned trust. Mr. Abernathy, true to his word, resigned in disgrace, vanishing from the legal community. I heard later he was facing a review by the State Bar Association. Evelyn formally notified Argent Sovereign Holdings of the situation. As predicted, they were furious. Their lawyers descended, threatening fire and brimstone. But their fury was met with the cold, hard wall of facts. Their loan was based on fraudulent collateral and a deceased debtor. The designated trustee had legally disclaimed the role. The estate was insolvent. Their only recourse was to pick over the scraps of what was left, which amounted to the house, the fake art, and a stock portfolio that was barely enough to cover their legal fees. They had been outmaneuvered, a rare occurrence for them, and they were not pleased. The Sterling family name became toxic in the financial world. The story, in a sanitized version, trickled out into the society pages, a tale of a once great family that had fallen into financial ruin. The truth, in all its sordid detail, remained between me, Evelyn, and a handful of people who had been in that conference room. Chloe and Greg's lives were upended. Without the promise of a massive inheritance, and with the social stain of her family's collapse, their marriage, which had been a partnership of ambition and greed, quickly dissolved. Greg left her. Chloe was forced to sell her oversized house and move into a small condominium. She had to get a job for the first time in her life, working as a manager at a high-end boutique. I saw her once from across the street. She looked smaller, humbled. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a weary competence. She didn't see me, and I didn't try to make contact. Our relationship, if it could even be called that, was a casualty of our parents' final act. There was nothing left to say. My life, in contrast, became quiet and my own. The freelance security work I had been doing suddenly got a lot more interesting. Evelyn, impressed by my work, began referring me to her high-net-worth clients who needed discreet help with their own digital chaos. I became a sort of consultant for the wealthy, a ghost in their machines, organizing their digital lives, securing their assets, and identifying vulnerabilities they didn't even know they had. I charged a premium for my services, and, for the first time, my work was valued not just by me, but by the people who paid for it. I was earning my own, just as my parents had mockingly advised. But I was doing it on my terms, using the very skills they had dismissed. One afternoon, about a year after the will reading, I was in my study, finalizing a report for a new client. I looked at the shelf where my mother's books were neatly arranged, the small, tangible inheritance that had been my salvation. Next to them was the manila envelope from Abernathy's office, the one with a list of books. It was a reminder of how it had all started. It was a symbol of the great underestimation that had defined my life and had, in the end, set me free. My parents had built a legacy, but it wasn't the one they intended. Their legacy wasn't in money or social standing. It was in the spectacular implosion of their own making. They had constructed an elaborate trap for their children, a final testament to their arrogance and deceit. They believed they were punishing the son they saw as a failure and rewarding the daughter they saw as a success. But the system they designed had a fatal flaw. It was based on a complete misreading of who we were. They mistook Chloe's ambition for competence and my quietness for ineptitude. They thought they were the masters of their universe, but they didn't even have the right passwords. My unproductive pursuit had become my shield and my sword. I had protected myself with the knowledge they'd disregarded and had uncovered the truth with the skills they'd never bothered to understand. I felt no lingering anger, only a quiet, reflective peace. I had navigated the wreckage of my family and emerged whole on the other side. My name is Alex Sterling, and I'm the son who was told to earn his own. And I did. I earned my freedom. I earned my peace. And I earned the quiet satisfaction of knowing that in the end, the most valuable inheritance is the one you build for yourself, secured by integrity and based on a clear-eyed understanding of the truth.